Hi and welcome to Hack an Instant. Today we're going to see what we can do with a Polaroid Swinger. If you remember back in 1965 when this camera came out, you probably didn't remember much about the camera. You probably remembered more the commercials that sold the camera, and they featured Ali McGraw in a bikini walking down a beach swinging this camera along. I don't think anyone saw the camera, but they went out and bought it and millions of them were sold, literally millions. So what was the prognosis? Well, because the Swinger could only take black and white film and 3000 ASA at that, the picture quality was kind of not very good. It was also a much smaller format than the regular Polaroids, and the camera itself was just a cheap plastic camera with a plastic lens. Now, so this turned off probably a whole generation to photography, unfortunately. But the Swinger, people have very fond memories of it. Now, whether they have the fond memories of the commercial that sold it or whether it's because they had fun taking pictures, I am not sure. But I hear stories about people using these cameras and the AG1 flash that smoked and everything, and squeezing this button until it says yes and everything. It's just kind of an oddball camera that Polaroid made. Apparently, they made it to make the black and white film factories were idle at the time because color film just came out 3 years earlier, and they were not producing any very much black and white film. So they came out with this camera. One critic said it looks like a bar of ivory soap, but regardless, I was always curious about a Swinger. I've never had one because I don't collect the plastic ones, but I saw one in a store somewhere for free and they were just giving it away. So I just picked it up and thought, what can I do with this thing? Can I actually make it work? Because roll film for the camera is long gone. It's been many years, decades since it has been produced. So I was just thinking, what is the closest film format? And that is 120 film, of course. 120 film is almost the same size as the roll film that was in this camera. So that's what I thought, maybe that wouldn't be too hard to do. And it ended up not being very difficult. So let me do a little bit of a show and tell of what needed to be done to this camera to make it use 120 film. First of all, the most important thing, because it didn't have a film divider right here, the negative roll went over this way and the positive roll was in here. They didn't need a divider here, but when you're using 120 film, you really need this divider. So I designed and 3D printed up one of these and stuck it in there and glued it in. And the next thing that needed to be done is a couple of tabs right here needed to be removed. Otherwise the film wouldn't roll past this point of the film guide. The reason why they're there is to direct the negative film through the rollers, and we don't need the rollers. Now the next thing, of course, was to seal off the rollers because light could get in here, and we're dealing with 3000 ASA film. This camera, just to explain, can only take 3000 ASA film, and the reason why is because it has a fixed shutter, 180th of a second or so. Maybe they said it was 1/200th. I measured 180th of a second. And the way you adjust exposure is you twist this knob until, and you look through the viewfinder and twist this knob until it says yes inside the viewfinder. It's kind of an odd thing. You have to kind of see it to experience it. But once it says yes, then you can take the picture just by pressing the button, and the shutter resets itself. So it's not really you don't have to cock the shutter or anything. You just have to press the button to take the picture. And all this does is it just adjusts the aperture on the lens of this camera. So the problem is because of the fixed shutter speed of 1/200th of a second, and because the metering system is made for 3000 ASA film or ISO 3000, you can only use 3000 ASA film. So what 3000 ASA film is available? Well, Ilford still makes their Delta 3200 film. This stuff is really nice film, actually. For 3200 ASA, it's kind of rated for 3200, but it shoots kind of at 1600. You kind of have to push it with your processing when you process this film, but you can get 3200 ASA out of this film, or ISO 3200. I use ASA because it's kind of old school, and that's what they all talked back in the 60s, ASA. The ISO thing, maybe that was in Europe, but I always use ASA here in Canada. But this stuff is great film, and it will work in this camera unmodified, so you don't have to modify any exposure settings or any metering or anything. It just drops in and works. So how, besides this divider, what needs to go in here? Well, all that needs to happen is you just need a couple of adapters for the take-up spool and a wind knob, and you also need to drill this hole right here. There's a little hole here so that you can count the exposures as you wind it on, so you know what exposure, you know how far to wind it to the next exposure. I have this piece of tape over it because it's at 3200 ASA. I want to avoid light leaks, so I only wind it in the shade. So here are the adapters. One adapter has a little triangle in it to engage the wind knob, so that goes on one end, and the other adapter goes on the other end. Very, very simple. And this is on the take-up spool. And you just basically open the back of the camera and drop the take-up spool into the take-up slot. Well, this is where the negatives used to go, but this will be the take-up slot here. And then you take the roll of film and you drop it in here. So we'll take just kind of this is just a paper roll, there's no film in here, but we drop it in this side, and you just kind of drop it and make sure it doesn't unroll too much. And then you just kind of pass it over to this side and stick it in the little slot there and start winding, and hopefully it takes up. At that point you can just shut the door and lock it, and then put the wind knob in. I just have the wind knob here. It's got a little triangle that matches the little wind, it matches the little receptacle on top, and you just put it in the top here. And then you wind the film until you can see, if you can see that the little hole, you'll see like little black marks. There's one mark, and then you'll see the counter go one little dot, two dots, little dot, and then you'll see the number right here, and that means you're on exposure number 1. Then you're ready to shoot. All you have to do is point, squeeze the button till it says yes, and then click. You click in the picture, and then you wind the next picture. Now what happens if you want to take a picture indoors? Well, that's a different story. I don't have any AG1 bulbs. They're just single bulbs, and I've heard that they're a little bit on the dangerous side because basically a flash bulb is an explosion, and when it goes off, it basically kind of explodes inside, and there's like glass and there's plastic on the outside to prevent it from shattering and stuff. But I kind of like using flash cubes. Now flash cubes have one extra layer of protection on it. These little flash cubes here have AG1 bulbs inside them, but they have a nice plastic coating on the outside. Plus I have a ton of these things, so that makes it easier for me to use these things. So I just put the flash cube in another 3D printed device. It's a little adapter that adapts from AG1 bulbs to flash bulbs. And so I just stick it in like this, and yeah, just point it to the next good exposure, and then you can just plug it in to this right here. And then when indoors, this is another trick. There's a little distance scale on the top here, and you have to set that distance scale to how far you're away to the subject. And this is how it exposes correctly, because the closer you are to the subject, the more it stops down the aperture. So let's say I'm at 6 feet, and set it for 6 feet, and then take the picture. They're very bright. This is how you use the flash, and I like this method just because it's a little bit safer, and I have a bunch of these flash bulbs. And when I need to go on to the next one, you just twist it to the next one, and then you're ready to shoot again. Now after you're done shooting, you just wind the film right to the end, and after the last exposure, I think you get 8 exposures on one 120 roll, which isn't very many, but the pictures are they're like 6 by 7.5 or so, not quite 6 by 9, even though you're using the 6 by 9 numbers on the film. So when you open the door, the film is ready to pull out. There we go. And then it's ready to develop. And once you develop it, you get these 6x9 pictures, which are kind of cute, or you can enlarge them bigger. If you keep them the original size, they'll be about the same size as old Swinger pictures, which is kind of neat. So you develop them, you lay the negatives out on a piece of photographic paper, and then you contact print them to get the 6x7.5 pictures out of them. So I just happen to have a roll of film that I developed a while back, and here are the size of pictures that you get. They're kind of cute. These are, as I said, very close to the original Swinger size, and I think they actually look kind of cool because you can see the writing of the film. It says Ilford Delta 3200, and it shows the exposure number and everything. And the film border isn't quite perfect because the inside of the Swinger has some interesting light traps to make it look kind of funny. But these are the kind of pictures that it takes, and it takes fairly good pictures. This roll, I had to really up the contrast when I contact printed it because I used D76, and apparently with Delta 3200 you should use more of a DDX or maybe a phenidone based, a PQ kind of developer. And so the next roll that I developed actually turned out a lot better, a lot more dense negatives. These ones were pretty thin negatives, but it's still, I thought, kind of cool to see that the Swinger can produce photos and it's not that hard. The files for printing these are available on Thingiverse or my website, and you can just download them and print them, or you can send them to a print service like PCBWay so that they can print them, send them back to you, and just install those the pieces that need to go into the camera and follow the instructions on my website, and you can make your Swinger work again. So if you have one of these old Swingers sitting in your attic or sitting in your shelf somewhere, and you think, well, that looks kind of cool, or I remember those days, put it back into service again and see how much fun you can have with it. These things are kind of nostalgic to use, and they actually take pretty good pictures. Even when you blow them up to maybe like a 4x5 and stuff, it's fairly sharp. The edges might not be very sharp, but it's a fairly sharp picture, and you'd be surprised what kind of quality you'll get out of it. You'll also get probably older people like me who remember the commercial with Ali MacGraw strolling down the beach with this camera with people playing beach volleyball behind her and stuff like that, and then zip it off, and that jingle, the Swinger jingle, is so funny. People often will remember that Swinger jingle. So get your this old camera out and get it used again. And that's all I have for you today. This is Hack an Instant, and thank you for watching.